The snow was falling softly on the streets of New York City. It was a cold December evening. The wind was sharp and the air was freezing. People walked quickly on the sidewalks. They wanted to get home or find a warm place to sit. The streets were full of bright lights from shops and restaurants. On the corner of Madison Avenue stood a famous restaurant called the Golden Melody. It was one of the most expensive places to eat in the whole city. Rich people came here. Business leaders came here. Famous actors and singers came here. The restaurant had beautiful white walls, golden lights, and soft music playing all the time. In the middle of the dining room sat a grand piano. It was a beautiful black piano. It cost more than most people's houses. Every night, a professional piano player would come and play beautiful music for the guests. The guests would eat their expensive food and listen to the lovely sounds. They felt special. They felt important. The Golden Melody was not a place for ordinary people. It was a place for the rich and powerful. On this cold December night, something unusual happened. An old man walked slowly down the sidewalk. His name was Thomas. He was 72 years old. His hair was gray and thin. His face had many lines and wrinkles. He had kind eyes that looked tired but gentle. He wore an old brown coat that was too big for him. The coat had holes in some places. His shoes were old and worn out. One shoe had a small hole near the toe. Thomas stopped in front of the Golden Melody. He looked through the large glass windows. He could see the beautiful dining room inside. He could see the well-dressed people eating and talking. He could see the waiters in their black suits carrying plates of food. And most importantly, he could see the grand piano sitting in the center of the room. Thomas smiled when he saw the piano. His eyes became soft and warm. He stood there for a long moment just looking at it. The snow continued to fall around him. Some snowflakes landed on his gray hair and on his old coat, but Thomas did not seem to notice. He was lost in his thoughts. A young couple walked past him. They were dressed in expensive clothes. The man wore a long black coat and shiny shoes. The woman wore a red dress and a fur jacket. They looked at Thomas and made faces. The woman whispered something to her husband. They both laughed quietly and went inside the restaurant. Thomas took a deep breath. He had not eaten a proper meal in 3 days. He had very little money in his pocket, but something was pulling him toward this restaurant. Something was calling him inside. It was not just the food. It was the piano. He had not touched a piano in many, many years. Thomas pushed open the heavy glass door and walked inside. The warm air hit his face immediately. It felt good after the cold outside. The smell of delicious food filled his nose. He could smell roasted meat, fresh bread, and sweet desserts. His stomach made a small sound. He was very hungry. The hostess at the front desk looked up. Her name was. She was a young woman with hair pulled back tightly. She wore a black dress and expensive jewelry. When she saw Thomas, her smile faded. Her eyes moved up and down, looking at his old clothes and worn shoes. Her face showed disgust, though she tried to hide it. "Can I help you?" asked. Her voice was cold and unfriendly. "Good evening," Thomas said politely. His voice was soft and gentle. "I would like a table, please." Looked at him for a moment. She did not believe this old man could afford to eat here. A simple salad at the Golden Melody cost $50. A main course cost over $100. This man looked like he could not afford a sandwich from a street cart. "Do you have a reservation?" asked. "No, I do not," Thomas said. "I was just passing by and thought I would come in." Looked around the restaurant. There were several empty tables, but she did not want to seat this man. He would embarrass the restaurant. The other guests would complain. "I am sorry, sir," said with a fake smile. "We are fully booked tonight. There are no tables available." Thomas looked at the dining room. He could clearly see at least 5 empty tables. He looked back he understood what was happening. He had seen this before. People judged him by his clothes. They thought he was poor and worthless. They did not know anything about him. "I can see some empty tables," Thomas said gently. He was not angry. He was just stating a fact. His face turned slightly red. She was caught in her lie. Before she could say anything, a man walked over. He was tall with dark hair and a serious face. He wore an expensive suit and a gold watch. This was Mr. Vincent, the manager of the Golden Melody. "Is there a problem here?" Mr. Vincent asked. He looked at Thomas with suspicious eyes. "This gentleman wants a table," said. "I told him we are fully booked." Mr. Vincent studied Thomas carefully. He saw the old coat, the worn shoes, and the tired face. He did not see someone worthy of eating at his restaurant. "Sir, this is a very exclusive restaurant," Mr. Vincent said. His voice was polite but cold. "Perhaps you would be more comfortable somewhere else." Thomas looked at Mr. Vincent. He did not show any anger or hurt. He just nodded slowly. "I understand," Thomas said, "but I have money. I can pay for my food. I just want a simple meal and maybe—" He paused and looked at the grand piano. "Maybe I could listen to some music." Mr. Vincent followed his gaze to the piano. Something about the way this old man looked at the piano was strange. There was a deep longing in his eyes, a deep love. At that moment, a waiter rushed over to Mr. Vincent. He whispered something in the manager's ear. Mr. Vincent's face changed. He looked worried. "What do you mean he is not coming?" Mr. Vincent said loudly. "He was supposed to be here 30 minutes ago." "He called, sir," the waiter said. "There was an accident on the highway. He is stuck in traffic. He will not be here for at least 2 hours." Mr. Vincent looked around the dining room. The guests were starting to notice that there was no music. Some of them were looking at the empty piano bench. Some of them were whispering to each other. The Golden Melody was famous for its live piano music. Without it, the atmosphere was not the same. "This is a disaster," Mr. Vincent muttered. Thomas watched this conversation quietly. He understood what had happened. The piano player was not coming. The restaurant had no music. "Excuse me," Thomas said softly. Mr. Vincent turned to look at him. He had almost forgotten about the old man. "What?" Mr. Vincent asked impatiently. "I could not help but hear," Thomas said. "Your piano player is not coming tonight." "That is none of your concern," Mr. Vincent said rudely. Thomas nodded. "You are right, but I have a suggestion. What if I play the piano for you tonight? In exchange, you could give me dinner." Mr. Vincent stared at Thomas. Then he laughed. It was not a kind laugh. It was a mocking laugh, also laughed. Even the waiter smiled. "You," Mr. Vincent said, "you want to play the piano at the Golden Melody?" "Yes," Thomas said simply. Mr. Vincent shook his head. "Sir, we only have professional musicians play here, world-class pianists. I am sure you understand." Thomas smiled gently. "I understand, but you have no piano player tonight, and I am offering to help." Mr. Vincent looked at Thomas for a long moment. He was about to say no, but then he looked at the dining room again. The guests were getting restless. He needed music. He needed something. "Fine," Mr. Vincent said finally. "But if you are not good, you stop immediately. And you leave, understood?" "Understood," Thomas said. Mr. Vincent pointed to a small table in the far corner of the room. It was the worst table in the restaurant, near the kitchen door. "You can sit there," he said, "and you can play one song, just one. Then we will decide." Thomas nodded. "Thank you, that is all I need." As Thomas walked toward the table, several guests turned to look at him. Some of them whispered. Some of them laughed quietly. One woman leaned toward her husband and said, "Can you believe they let him in here? He looks like a homeless man." Thomas heard her words, but he did not react. He just kept walking. He sat down at the small table and looked at the piano. His heart was beating faster now. It had been so many years since he had played, so many years since he had touched the keys. He did not know if he still could. But tonight he was going to find out. Thomas sat at the small table in the corner of the restaurant. The table was old and wobbly. It was placed right next to the kitchen door. Every few minutes, the door would swing open and a waiter would rush out carrying plates of food. The noise from the kitchen was loud. Thomas could hear pots banging and chefs shouting. This was clearly the worst table in the whole restaurant. Mr. Vincent had put him here on purpose. He wanted Thomas to feel unwelcome. He wanted Thomas to know that he did not belong. But Thomas did not mind. He was not here for the table. He was not here for the fancy atmosphere. He was here for the piano, and from where he sat, he had a perfect view of the beautiful black. A young waiter came to his table. The waiter was perhaps 25 years old. He had brown hair and a thin face. His name tag said James. James looked at Thomas with curious eyes. He did not look at him with disgust like the others. He seemed more interested than judgmental. "Good evening, sir," James said politely. "Can I get you something to drink?" Thomas looked at the menu. The prices made his eyes go wide. A glass of water cost $5. A cup of coffee cost $12. A glass of wine cost $30. Thomas had only $47 in his pocket. That was all the money he had in the world. "Just water, please," Thomas said. James nodded. "And for food, would you like to see the dinner menu?" Thomas shook his head. "I will wait. I need to play the piano first. Mr. Vincent said I could play one song. If he likes it, then maybe I can have dinner." James looked surprised. "You are going to play the piano?" "Yes," Thomas said. "I hope so." James leaned in closer. He spoke in a low voice so others could not hear. "Sir, are you sure about this? The people here, they are very critical. They expect perfection. If you make even one small mistake, they will laugh at you." Thomas smiled warmly at the young waiter. He appreciated the concern. It had been a long time since anyone had shown him kindness. "Thank you for the warning," Thomas said, "but I have to try." James nodded slowly. He went to get the water. As he walked away, he kept looking back at Thomas. There was something about this old man, something that James could not explain. He seemed different from other people. At a nearby table sat a group of wealthy businessmen. They were all wearing expensive suits. They had gold watches and diamond rings. They were drinking wine that cost $500 a bottle. Their leader was a large man with a red face and a loud voice. His name was Mr. Harrison. He was a real estate developer who owned many buildings in the city. Mr. Harrison had noticed Thomas when he walked in. He had watched with amusement as Mr. Vincent tried to turn him away. Now he was watching with great interest as Thomas sat at the corner table. "Look at that old fool," Mr. Harrison said to his friends. "He thinks he is going to play the piano here. Can you imagine?" His friends laughed. One of them, a thin man with glasses, shook his head. "He probably learned to play Mary Had a Little Lamb when he was a child. Now he thinks he is a musician." "This should be entertaining," another man said. "I cannot wait to see him embarrass himself." At another table sat an elegant woman in her 60s. Her name was Mrs. Elizabeth Monroe. She was the widow of a famous banker. She was very rich and very proud. She wore a blue silk dress and pearls around her neck. Her gray hair was styled perfectly. She looked at Thomas with cold eyes. "They should not have let him in," she said to her companion, a younger woman who was her assistant. "This is supposed to be a respectable establishment. Now we have to look at that vagrant." "Perhaps they felt sorry for him," her assistant said. "Sorry," Mrs. Monroe laughed bitterly. "People like him do not deserve pity. They deserve to be shown the door." Thomas could not hear what these people were saying, but he could feel their eyes on him. He could feel their judgment. It pressed down on him like a heavy weight, but he had felt this weight before, many times in his life. He had learned to carry it. The minutes passed slowly. Thomas sat quietly at his table drinking his water. He watched the other guests. He watched the waiters moving around the room, and he watched the piano. It sat there silent and beautiful, waiting for someone to play it. Finally, Mr. Vincent walked over to Thomas. He did not sit down. He stood over him, looking down with impatient eyes. "The guests are getting restless," Mr. Vincent said. "Our regular pianist will not be here for at least another hour, so I am going to give you a chance. One song, that is all. If it is bad, you stop and you leave. If it is acceptable, we will see." Thomas nodded. He stood up slowly. His old bones ached from the cold outside, but he ignored the pain. He walked toward the piano. His heart was beating fast now. His hands were shaking slightly. The dining room fell quiet. The guests had noticed the old man walking toward the piano. They put down their forks and glasses. They turned to watch. Some of them whispered to each other. Some of them smiled with mean amusement. They were expecting a disaster. They were expecting to laugh. Mr. Harrison raised his wine glass. "Here we go," he said loudly. "This should be good." His friends laughed. Mrs. Monroe shook her head in disgust. "This is ridiculous. Why is Vincent allowing this?" Thomas reached the piano. He stood there for a moment looking at it. It was a beautiful instrument. The black wood was polished and shining. The keys were white and clean. He could smell the wood and the polish. It brought back memories, so many memories. He remembered another piano, a piano in a small apartment, a piano that his wife used to play. She would play every evening after dinner. Beautiful songs, sad songs, happy songs. Her name was. She had the most beautiful hands. Long, thin fingers that danced on the keys like birds flying through the sky. Had been dead for 15 years. Thomas closed his eyes for a moment. He could see her face. He could hear her voice. He could feel her hand on his. "Play something beautiful," she used to say. "Play something that will make the world stop and listen." Thomas opened his eyes. He sat down on the piano bench. The bench was comfortable and well-made. It was the perfect height. He placed his hands on the keys. His fingers touched the smooth ivory. It felt familiar. It felt like coming home. The room was completely silent now. Everyone was watching. Even the waiters had stopped moving. Even the sounds from the kitchen had quieted down. Everyone wanted to see what would happen. Mr. Vincent stood near the kitchen door, arms crossed, ready to stop this embarrassment as soon as it started. The hostess was watching from the front desk with a smug smile. She was already planning what to say when this old man failed. James, the young waiter, stood near Thomas's table. He was watching with hope in his eyes. Something told him that this moment was going to be special. Thomas took a deep breath. He looked at the keys. He did not have any sheet music. He did not need any. The music was inside him. It had always been inside him. It was part of his soul. He began to play. The first notes came out soft and gentle. They floated through the air like snowflakes. They were simple notes, nothing special. A few people in the audience smiled with satisfaction. This was going to be what they expected. Simple, amateur. But then something changed. The notes began to grow. They became more complex, more beautiful. Thomas's fingers began to move faster. They flew across the keys with incredible speed and precision. The music filled the room. It was not just sound anymore. It was emotion. It was feeling. It was life itself. Thomas was playing Chopin, Ballade No. 1 in G minor, one of the most difficult and beautiful pieces ever written for piano. Professional pianists practiced for years to master this piece. Some never succeeded. But Thomas played it like he was breathing, like it was the most natural thing in the world. The guests stopped smiling. Their faces changed. Mr. Harrison's mouth fell open. Mrs. Monroe's cold eyes grew wide. At the front desk dropped her pen. Mr. Vincent unfolded his arms and took a step forward. No one could believe what they were hearing. This old man in the worn coat and broken shoes was playing like a master. No, not just like a master. He was playing like a genius, like someone who had been born with music in his blood. The notes rose and fell. They cried and laughed. They whispered and shouted. Thomas closed his eyes and let the music take control. He was not in the restaurant anymore. He was somewhere else, somewhere beautiful and peaceful. He was with again. And for the first time in 15 years, he felt alive. The music continued to fill the restaurant. Every note was perfect. Every phrase was beautiful. Thomas played with his eyes closed, his body swaying gently with the melody. His fingers moved across the keys like water flowing in a river. There was no hesitation, no mistakes, just pure, perfect music. The guests sat frozen in their seats. They had come to this restaurant expecting a nice dinner with pleasant background music. They had not expected this. They had not expected to witness something magical. A woman at a corner table began to cry. She did not know why. The music just touched something deep inside her heart. Tears rolled down her cheeks, and she did not bother to wipe them away. Her husband reached over and held her hand. He did not say anything. There was nothing to say. Mr. Harrison, the loud businessman who had mocked Thomas earlier, sat completely still. His wine glass was frozen halfway to his lips. He had forgotten about drinking. He had forgotten about everything. All he could do was listen. His friend with the glasses leaned over and whispered, "Who is this man?" Mr. Harrison shook his head slowly. "I have no idea, but whoever he is incredible." At her table, Mrs. Elizabeth Monroe had changed completely. The cold expression was gone from her face. Her eyes were soft now, wet. She was thinking about her late husband. He had loved classical music. They used to go to concerts together at Carnegie Hall. They would sit in the front row and hold hands while the orchestra played. Those were the happiest days of her life. The music brought all those memories back. "Are you all right, Mrs. Monroe?" her assistant asked. Mrs. Monroe nodded. She could not speak. Her throat was too tight with emotion. Mr. Vincent stood near the kitchen door with his mouth hanging open. He had managed restaurants for 20 years. He had heard hundreds of piano players. Professional musicians from all over the world had played at the Golden Melody, but he had never heard anyone play like this. This old man, this homeless-looking stranger, was better than all of them. James, the young waiter, leaned against the wall and watched with wonder. He had been right. There was something special about this old man. He had felt it from the moment Thomas walked through the door. Now everyone else could feel it too. The hostess who had tried to turn Thomas away stood at her desk with a red face. She felt ashamed. She had judged this man by his clothes. She had thought he was worthless. How wrong she had been. The music reached its climax. Thomas's fingers flew across the keys with incredible speed. The notes came faster and faster, louder and louder. The sound filled every corner of the restaurant. It bounced off the walls and ceiling. It wrapped around every person in the room like a warm blanket. Then slowly the music began to soften. The storm passed. The notes became gentle again, tender, like a mother singing to her child, like a lover whispering goodbye. Thomas thought of the last time he had seen her. She was lying in a hospital bed, pale and thin. The cancer had taken almost everything from her, but she had still smiled at him. She had still held his hand. "Promise me something," she had said. Her voice was weak, barely a whisper. "Anything," Thomas had replied. Tears were streaming down his face. "Promise me you will keep playing. Promise me you will share your gift with the world." Thomas had nodded, "I promise." But he had broken that promise. After died, he could not play anymore. Every time he sat at a piano, he saw her face. He heard her voice. The pain was too much, so he stopped. He put away his music. He closed the lid on his piano and never opened it again. For 15 years, he had been silent. Until tonight. The final notes of the piece hung in the air. Thomas held them for a long moment, letting them fade away naturally. Then there was silence. Complete, absolute silence. No one moved. No one spoke. No one even breathed. Thomas opened his eyes slowly. He looked at his hands on the keys. They were shaking now, not from nervousness but from emotion. He had done it. He had played again, and it had felt wonderful. He turned around on the bench to face the room. Everyone was staring at him. Their faces showed shock, wonder, and amazement. Some people had tears in their eyes. Some people had their hands over their mouths. Then suddenly, one person started clapping. It was James, the young waiter. He stood by the wall, clapping his hands together with a big smile on his face. Another person joined in, then another, then another. Within seconds, the entire restaurant was applauding. The sound of clapping filled the room. It was loud and enthusiastic and genuine. People were standing up from their seats. They were giving Thomas a standing ovation. "Bravo!" someone shouted. "Magnificent!" another voice called out. "More, more!" several people chanted. Thomas sat on the piano bench, overwhelmed by the response. He had not expected this. He had just wanted to play one song. He had just wanted to feel the keys under his fingers again. He had not expected to move an entire room to tears. Mr. Vincent rushed over to the piano. His face was completely different now. The suspicion and arrogance were gone. In their place was respect and admiration. "Sir," Mr. Vincent said, his voice shaking slightly. That was extraordinary. I have never heard anything like it. Please, please forgive me for how I treated you earlier. I made a terrible mistake." Thomas smiled gently. "There is nothing to forgive. You did not know." "But I should not have judged you," Mr. Vincent said. "I should not have assumed. Please let me make it up to you. Your dinner tonight is free. Whatever you want, it is on the house." The applause was still going. People were still standing. Some of them were taking out their phones to take pictures. Others were moving closer to the piano, wanting to get a better look at this mysterious old man. Mr. Harrison pushed his way through the crowd. He was a big man, and people moved aside for him. He stood in front of Thomas with an expression of deep respect. "Sir," Mr. Harrison said, "I owe you an apology. I said some unkind things about you earlier. I was wrong. That was the most beautiful piano playing I have ever heard in my life." Thomas nodded. "Thank you. That is very kind of you to say." "What is your name?" Mr. Harrison asked. "You must be famous. You must have played at concert halls all over the world." Thomas hesitated. He had not spoken his full name in many years. After died, he had walked away from his old life. He had left behind his career, his fame, his money. He had become nobody, just an old man wandering the streets. "My name is Thomas," he said simply, "just Thomas." Mrs. Monroe had also made her way to the piano. Her eyes were still wet with tears. She looked at Thomas with new eyes, eyes that saw the person, not the clothes. "Sir," she said softly, "I must also apologize. I thought terrible things about you when you walked in. I was cruel and unfair. Can you ever forgive me?" Thomas looked at this elegant woman. He could see the pain in her eyes, the loneliness. She reminded him of someone. She reminded him of himself. "We all make mistakes," Thomas said. "What matters is that we learn from them." Mrs. Monroe nodded. A single tear rolled down her cheek. "Thank you," she whispered. The restaurant was buzzing with excitement now. Everyone was talking about the mysterious piano player. Who was he? Where did he come from? How could someone so ordinary-looking play so extraordinarily? James, the young waiter, managed to get close to Thomas. He was smiling from ear to ear. "Sir, that was amazing," James said. "I knew there was something special about you. I just knew it." Thomas chuckled. "You were the only one who was kind to me when I arrived. I appreciate that." "Please," James said, "will you play more? Everyone wants to hear more." Thomas looked around the room. All these people who had judged him, mocked him, looked down on him. Now they were begging him to play. Life was strange sometimes. He turned back to the piano. His fingers hovered over the keys. "I suppose," Thomas said slowly, "I could play one more piece." The crowd cheered. They returned to their seats, eager to hear more. The waiters started moving again, bringing food and drinks, but no one was really interested in eating any more. They were all focused on the old man at the piano. Thomas closed his eyes. He thought about what to play next. Then he smiled. He knew exactly the right piece. He began to play Claire Lune, the Moonlight Sonata. It was one of his favorite pieces. She used to play it on quiet evenings when the moon was bright outside their window. The beautiful notes filled the room again, soft and dreamy, like a gentle kiss, like a warm memory, like love that never dies. And somewhere, somehow, Thomas felt that was listening. Thomas played Claire Lune with all his heart. The gentle notes floated through the restaurant like moonlight streaming through a window. It was soft and tender and full of longing. Every person in the room sat perfectly still, afraid that even the smallest movement might disturb the beautiful music. When the piece ended, the applause was even louder than before. People were crying openly now. They did not care who saw them. The music had touched something deep inside their souls. Thomas played 3 more pieces that night. Each one was more beautiful than the last. He played. The restaurant had become a concert hall. The guests had become an audience. And Thomas had become what he once was long ago, a master, a genius, a living legend. Finally, after almost 2 hours of playing, Thomas lifted his hands from the keys for the last time. He was tired. His fingers ached, but his heart was full, fuller than it had been in 15 years. The standing ovation lasted for 5 minutes. People clapped until their hands hurt. They shouted praise and thanks. Some of them threw flowers that had been on their tables. The floor around the piano was covered with roses and lilies. Mr. Vincent personally escorted Thomas to the best table in the restaurant. It was right in the center of the room, next to a large window that looked out on the snowy street. A white tablecloth covered the table. Crystal glasses sparkled in the candlelight. Fresh flowers sat in a silver vase. "Please," Mr. Vincent said, pulling out the chair for Thomas. "Sit here. You are our guest of honor tonight." Thomas sat down slowly. His old bones were tired from sitting on the piano bench for so long, but he did not complain. He just smiled and said, "Thank you. This is very kind." "It is the least I can do," Mr. Vincent said. "I behaved terribly toward you. I am deeply ashamed." "The past is the past," Thomas said. "Let us not speak of it any more." A team of waiters appeared with plates of food. They brought everything: soup, salad, fresh bread with butter, roasted chicken with herbs, grilled fish with lemon, vegetables cooked in olive oil, potatoes mashed with cream and garlic, and for dessert, chocolate cake with vanilla ice cream. Thomas had not seen so much food in months. His eyes grew wide as the plates were placed before him. He did not know where to start. "Please," Mr. Vincent said, "eat as much as you want. Enjoy everything." Thomas picked up his fork with a shaking hand. He took a small bite of the chicken. It was delicious. The best thing he had tasted in years. Tears came to his eyes, but he blinked them away quickly. He did not want anyone to see him cry. As Thomas ate, people kept coming to his table. They wanted to shake his hand. They wanted to thank him. They wanted to know more about him. Mr. Harrison was one of the first. The big businessman sat down across from Thomas without asking permission. His face was red from wine and excitement. "Sir, I must know," Mr. Harrison said. "Who are you? Where did you learn to play like that? You cannot be just some ordinary person off the street." Thomas took a sip of water. He was not sure how much to reveal. His past was complicated, painful. He had worked hard to forget it. "I learned to play when I was very young," Thomas said carefully. "My mother taught me. She was a piano teacher." "But your skill," Mr. Harrison pressed, "that is not just natural talent. That is years of training, decades of practice. You must have studied at a conservatory. You must have performed professionally." Thomas looked down at his plate. The memories were coming back now, memories he had tried to bury. "I did study," Thomas admitted, "a long time ago at—" Mr. Harrison's eyes went wide. "The School of Music, that is the best music school in the world." Thomas nodded. "Yes, I studied there in the 1970s. "And after that, did you perform? Did you make recordings?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke softly. Yes, I performed all over the world. Europe, Asia, South America. I played at Carnegie Hall, at the Sydney Opera House, at the Royal Albert Hall in London. Mr. Harrison stared at Thomas in disbelief. But that means, you must be famous, you must be someone important. What is your full name? Thomas sighed. There was no point hiding anymore. The truth would come out eventually. My name is Thomas, he said. Mr. Harrison jumped back in his chair as if he had been struck by lightning. His face turned pale. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Thomas, he finally managed to say. The Thomas, the concert pianist, the one who played for presidents and kings. Thomas nodded slowly. The same. But you disappeared. 15 years ago, everyone thought you were dead. Thomas smiled sadly. I did not die, I just stopped living. The news spread quickly through the restaurant. Thomas, the legendary Thomas, one of the greatest pianists of the 20th century, a man who had sold millions of records, a man who had won every award in classical music, a man who had been called a once-in-a-generation genius. And he had walked into this restaurant tonight looking like a homeless man. James, the young waiter, had heard the name before. His grandmother used to listen to Thomas' recordings. She had a vinyl record with his picture on the cover, a young man with dark hair and bright eyes sitting at a grand piano. That young man was now the old man eating dinner at table 1. Sir, James said, approaching the table carefully. Is it true? Are you really Thomas? Thomas looked at the young waiter. He saw the wonder in his eyes, the admiration. It reminded him of how fans used to look at him long ago. Yes, Thomas said, that is who I used to be. My grandmother loves your music, James said excitedly. She has all your records. She plays them every Sunday morning. She says your version of the Moonlight Sonata is the most beautiful thing she has ever heard. Thomas felt warmth spread through his chest. After all these years, people still remembered. People still listened. Tell your grandmother thank you, Thomas said. Tell her that her kindness means more than she will ever know. By now, the entire restaurant knew who Thomas was. People were searching his name on their phones. They were finding old videos of his concerts on the internet. They were reading about his life, his career, his tragedy. Because there was tragedy, deep, terrible tragedy. One website told the story. 15 years ago, Thomas lost his wife to cancer. She was also a pianist, though not as famous as Thomas. They had met when they were both young students. They had fallen in love over Chopin and they had married and spent 30 beautiful years together. When died, Thomas was devastated. He canceled all his concerts. He turned away all offers to perform. He gave away his money to charity. He sold his house, his cars, everything he owned. Then he simply vanished. Some people said he had moved to a small village in Italy. Others said he had joined a monastery in Tibet. A few rumors suggested he had taken his own life, but nobody knew the truth. Until tonight. Mrs. Monroe sat at her table, reading the story on her phone. Tears streamed down her face. She understood now. She understood the pain she had seen in Thomas's eyes. It was the same pain she felt every day since her own husband had died. She stood up and walked to Thomas's table. She did not care about social rules anymore. She did not care about appearances. She just needed to speak to him. Mister, she said softly, may I sit with you? Thomas looked up at her. He saw the tears on her face. He saw the understanding in her eyes. Of course, he said, please. Mrs. Monroe sat down across from him. For a moment she did not speak. She just looked at him. I lost my husband 5 years ago, she finally said. Heart attack, very sudden. One moment he was there, laughing and talking. The next moment he was gone. Thomas nodded. I am sorry, losing someone you love. It is the hardest thing in the world. After he died, I did not know how to live, Mrs. Monroe continued. I did not know who I was without him. For a long time I was just empty. I understand, Thomas said. I felt the same way when died. But tonight, Mrs. Monroe said, her voice breaking, when you played, I felt something. For the first time in 5 years, I felt alive again. Your music, it reached inside me and woke something up, something I thought was dead forever. Thomas reached across the table and gently took her hand. It was an intimate gesture, strange between two people who had just met, but somehow it felt right. That is what music does, Thomas said softly. It reminds us that we are still alive, even when we wish we were not. Mrs. Monroe squeezed his hand. Tears fell from her eyes onto the white tablecloth. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for playing tonight. Thank you for coming back. Thomas smiled. It was a sad smile, but also a hopeful one. I think, he said slowly, that I am glad I came back too. Outside the window, the snow continued to fall. The street was white and quiet. The world seemed peaceful and still. And inside the restaurant, an old man who had lost everything was beginning to find something again. Hope. The night continued at the Golden Melody. It was now past 10 o'clock, but no one wanted to leave. The restaurant should have closed at 11, but Mr. Vincent had decided to keep it open for as long as Thomas stayed. This was a historic night, a night that would be remembered for years to come. People had started calling their friends and family. You will not believe who is here, they said into their phones. Thomas, the Thomas. Yes, he is alive. Yes, he just played for us. It was incredible. Within an hour, a small crowd had gathered outside the restaurant. People pressed their faces against the windows, trying to see the legendary pianist inside. Some of them were old fans who remembered his concerts from decades ago. Others were young people who had heard stories from their parents and grandparents. They all wanted to see the man who had once been called the greatest pianist in the world. Mr. Vincent had to call security to manage the crowd. 2 large men in black suits stood at the door, allowing only paying customers to enter. But the restaurant was already full. Every table was occupied. There was a waiting list of over 50 people. Inside, Thomas sat at his table, overwhelmed by all the attention. He had spent 15 years avoiding people, hiding from the world, living in small rooms in cheap hotels, eating at soup kitchens and homeless shelters. He had become invisible, and he had liked it that way. Now suddenly he was visible again. Everyone could see him. Everyone wanted something from him. A young woman approached his table. She was perhaps 30 years old, with long black hair and nervous eyes. She was holding a phone in her trembling hands. Mister, she said hesitantly, I am so sorry to bother you, but my mother, she is in the hospital. She is very sick. She has been a fan of yours for her entire life. She has all your recordings. She plays them every day. Would it be possible? Could you say hello to her on video call? Thomas looked at the young woman. He could see the fear in her eyes, the desperation. Her mother was dying and she wanted to give her one last gift. How could he say no? Of course, Thomas said gently, I would be honored. The young woman's face lit up with relief and gratitude. She quickly dialed a number on her phone. After a few rings, a weak voice answered. Hello, Sarah, is that you? Mom, yes, it is me, Sarah said. I have someone here who wants to talk to you. She handed the phone to Thomas. On the screen, he could see an elderly woman lying in a hospital bed. She was thin and pale. Tubes and wires were connected to her body. But when she saw Thomas's face, her eyes went wide. Her mouth fell open. Oh my God, she whispered. It cannot be, Thomas. Yes, ma'am, Thomas said with a warm smile. It is me. The woman started crying. I thought you were dead. Everyone said you were dead, but here you are, here you are. I am sorry I disappeared, Thomas said. I went through some difficult times, but I am here now. I have loved your music for 60 years, the woman said through her tears. I saw you play at Carnegie Hall in 1982. It was the most beautiful night of my life. My husband proposed to me that night, right after the concert. Thomas felt his heart squeeze tight. This woman had been touched by his music. His gift had been part of the most important moment of her life. "Thank you for telling me that," Thomas said. "It means more than you know." "Will you play again?" the woman asked hopefully. "Will you make more music?" Thomas paused. He had not thought about the future. He had not thought beyond this single night. "I do not know," he said honestly. "But tonight I played again, for the first time in 15 years, and it felt right." The woman smiled through her tears. "That makes me so happy. The world needs your music, mister. Please do not keep it hidden anymore." They talked for a few more minutes. Thomas wished her strength and peace. He told her that her love for music was a beautiful thing. Then he handed the phone back to Sarah. "Thank you," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you so much. You just made my mother the happiest woman in the world." After Sarah left, more people came. They all had stories. They all had memories. A man whose father had played Thomas's recordings every Christmas morning. A woman who had danced at her wedding to one of his pieces. A teenager who had learned to play piano by listening to his albums over and over again. Thomas listened to every story. He shook every hand. He signed napkins and menus and even someone's shirt. It was exhausting, but also beautiful. He had forgotten what it felt like to connect with people. He had forgotten what it felt like to matter. Around 11 o'clock, Mr. Vincent approached the table with a worried expression. "Mister," he said, "there are some reporters outside. They want to interview you. They want to write stories about your return. What should I tell them?" Thomas felt his stomach clench. Reporters, media, that meant cameras and questions and attention. That meant his quiet life would be over. I do not know," Thomas said uncertainly. Mrs. Monroe, who had been sitting nearby, leaned forward. "Thomas, may I offer some advice?" Thomas looked at her. In just a few hours, they had become something like friends. Two lonely people who understood each other's pain. "Please," Thomas said. "You cannot hide forever," Mrs. Monroe said gently. "Believe me, I tried. After my husband died, I wanted to disappear. I wanted the world to forget about me. But running away does not heal the pain. It only makes it worse." "What are you suggesting?" Thomas asked. "Talk to them," Mrs. Monroe said. "Tell your story, share what happened to you, not for fame or attention but because the world deserves to know. People have wondered about you for 15 years. They have worried about you. Let them know that you are okay." Thomas thought about her words. She was right, of course. He had been running for too long, hiding for too long. Maybe it was time to stop. "All right," Thomas said finally. "I will talk to them, but not tonight. Tonight I just want to enjoy this moment." Mr. Vincent nodded. "I will tell them to come back tomorrow." As the manager walked away, James the waiter appeared with a fresh pot of tea. He poured a cup for Thomas and set it down gently. "Sir," James said, "I just wanted to say again how much tonight has meant to me. I have worked in this restaurant for 2 years. I have seen many fancy people come and go, rich people, famous people, but none of them were like you." "What do you mean?" Thomas asked. "You are real," James said simply. "You do not pretend to be something you are not. You do not look down on people. Even after everyone treated you badly, you were still kind, still gentle. That is rare. That is special." Thomas smiled at the young man. "You remind me of myself when I was young, hopeful, idealistic, kind." "Can I ask you something?" James said. "Of course." "Why did you give it all up? You were at the top of the world, you had everything, fame, money, success. Why did you walk away?" Thomas was quiet for a moment. He stared at his cup of tea. Steam rose from the surface, curling into the air. "Because none of it mattered without her," Thomas said finally. "Was my everything. My partner, my best friend, we made music together. We made life together. When she died, the music died too. Or at least it felt that way." "But the music came back tonight," James said softly. Thomas nodded slowly. Yes, it did. I do not know why. Maybe because I was hungry and desperate. Maybe because I saw that beautiful piano and could not resist. Or maybe was telling me it was time. Time for what? Time to stop mourning, Thomas said. Time to start living again. James smiled. I think your wife would be proud of you tonight. Thomas felt tears prick his eyes. I hope so. I really hope so. The restaurant began to empty slowly as midnight approached. Guests paid their bills and said goodbye to Thomas. Many of them hugged him. Some of them cried. All of them thanked him for the beautiful music. Finally, when the restaurant was nearly empty, Mr. Vincent approached Thomas one last time. Mister, he said, it is very late. Do you have somewhere to stay tonight? Thomas had not thought about that. He had a small room at a cheap hotel downtown. It cost $30 a night, but that was 10 blocks away, and he was very tired. I have a hotel room, Thomas said, but it is quite far. Nonsense, Mr. Vincent said firmly. You are not walking anywhere in this cold. I will call you a car, and please let me pay for a better hotel. It is the least I can do after how I treated you. Thomas wanted to refuse. He did not like accepting charity, but he was exhausted. His old body ached, and the thought of walking through the snow was too much. Thank you, Thomas said. That is very generous. It is nothing, Mr. Vincent said. After what you gave us tonight, it is nothing at all. Outside, a black car was waiting. It was warm inside and smelled of leather. Thomas sank into the soft seat and closed his eyes. The driver pulled away from the restaurant and headed toward a 5-star hotel nearby. As the car moved through the snowy streets, Thomas thought about the night. He thought about the piano. He thought about the music. He thought about. And he smiled. For the first time in 15 years, he was looking forward to tomorrow. Thomas woke up the next morning in the softest bed he had slept in for years. The hotel room was beautiful. White sheets, fluffy pillows, golden curtains. Sunlight streamed through the large windows. Outside, he could see the city covered in fresh snow. It looked like a painting. For a moment, he forgot where he was. He forgot what had happened last night. Then it all came rushing back. The restaurant, the piano, the music, the applause, the tears, the love. It had not been a dream. It had all been real. Thomas sat up slowly and looked around the room. On the desk near the window, he saw a basket of fruit, a bottle of wine, and a card. He got out of bed and walked over to read it. Dear Mister, the card said, thank you for the most magical night our restaurant has ever seen. Please enjoy this room for as long as you need. Everything is paid for. With deepest respect, Vincent. Thomas smiled and shook his head. Yesterday he could not even afford a cup of coffee. Today he was staying in a luxury hotel with everything free. Life was strange. He took a long shower and put on his old clothes. They were still worn and dirty, but they were all he had. Then he went down to the hotel restaurant for breakfast. The hotel staff treated him like a king. They pulled out his chair for him. They brought him fresh orange juice and hot coffee. They offered him eggs, bacon, pancakes, waffles, and anything else he wanted. Just some toast and eggs, please, Thomas said. He was not used to so much attention. It made him uncomfortable. As he ate, he noticed people looking at him. They whispered to each other and pointed. Some of them held up their phones and took pictures. News had spread quickly about last night. Thomas, the missing piano legend, had been found playing for his dinner at a fancy restaurant. The story was everywhere. Thomas finished his breakfast quickly and went back to his room. He wanted to hide from all the attention, but when he got there, he found a newspaper that had been slipped under his door. On the front page was his picture, taken through the window of the restaurant. The headline read, Piano Legend Returns from the Dead. Thomas sat on the bed and read the article. It told the story of his career, his marriage to, her death from cancer, and his disappearance. It described last night's performance in glowing terms. People who had been there were quoted saying it was the most beautiful music they had ever heard. But the article also raised questions. Where had Thomas been for 15 years? How had he survived? Why had he come back now? And most importantly, would he play again? Thomas put down the newspaper and stared out the window. These were questions he did not have answers to. He did not know what came next. He did not know what he wanted. Around noon, there was a knock on his door. Thomas opened it carefully and found James, the young waiter from last night, standing in the hallway. He was wearing regular clothes instead of his waiter uniform. "Hello, mister," James said with a nervous smile. "I hope I am not bothering you. Mr. Vincent gave me the hotel address. I wanted to check on you." Thomas smiled warmly. "James, please come in." James entered the room and looked around with wide eyes. "Wow, this is a really nice room." "It is," Thomas agreed. "Much nicer than what I am used to." They sat down together, Thomas on the bed and James on the chair by the desk. "How are you feeling today?" James asked. "Overwhelmed," Thomas admitted. "Everything happened so fast. One day I am nobody, living in a cheap hotel, eating at soup kitchens. The next day I am front page news and everyone knows my name. Does it feel strange?" "Very strange," Thomas said. "I spent 15 years trying to be invisible. Now everyone can see me." James nodded thoughtfully. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Where were you all those years? What were you doing?" Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then he began to speak, slowly and carefully. "After died, I sold everything we owned. Our house, our cars, our furniture. I gave the money to charity. I kept only enough to survive. Then I left New York. I did not have a destination. I just walked." "Walked?" James repeated, confused. "Yes, I walked across the country, from city to city, town to town. I slept in homeless shelters, in churches, in parks. Sometimes kind people would let me stay in their homes for a night. I worked odd jobs when I needed money. I washed dishes, cleaned bathrooms, carried boxes, whatever I could find." James stared at him in disbelief. "For 15 years. 15 years, Thomas confirmed. "I was running away from my past, running away from the pain. I thought that if I kept moving, the sadness would not be able to catch me." "Did it work?" Thomas shook his head. "No, the sadness followed me everywhere. It was always there, waiting for me when I woke up in the morning, waiting for me when I closed my eyes at night. You cannot outrun grief. You can only learn to live with it." James wiped his eyes. He had not realized he was crying. "I am sorry, mister, that sounds so lonely." "It was lonely," Thomas agreed. "But I also met many kind people along the way, people who had nothing but shared everything, people who did not judge me for my appearance, people who showed me that goodness still exists in this world." "What made you come back to New York?" Thomas smiled. "I do not know exactly. I was in Philadelphia last week, sleeping in a shelter. One night I had a dream about. She was sitting at a piano playing our favorite song. She looked at me and said, 'It is time to go home.' When I woke up, I knew I had to come back to New York." "And you ended up at the Golden Melody." "By accident," Thomas said. "I was walking down the street looking for somewhere to get out of the cold. I saw the restaurant through the window. I saw the piano, and something pulled me inside." James smiled. "I am glad it did." "Me too," Thomas said. "I think led me there." There was a comfortable silence between them. Then James spoke again. "Mister, I have to tell you something. Last night changed my life." Thomas looked at him curiously. "How so?" "I have been working at that restaurant for 2 years," James said. "I hate it. The customers are rude. The managers are strict. Every day feels the same. I go there, I serve food, I go home. I was starting to think that this was all my life would ever be. And now I feel different," James said. "Watching you last night, seeing the power of your music, seeing how it moved people to tears, it reminded me that there is more to life than just surviving. There is beauty. There is passion. There is purpose. Thomas smiled. What is your passion, James? James hesitated. I want to be a writer. I have always wanted to be a writer. I have notebooks full of stories, but I never had the courage to do anything with them. I was too scared of failure. Fear of failure is the enemy of dreams, Thomas said. I was afraid too once. When I was young, I almost quit piano because I was afraid I was not good enough. What changed your mind? My mother, Thomas said. She told me that the only real failure is never trying. She said that talent is a gift, but courage is a choice. I chose to be courageous, and it changed my life. James absorbed these words. They sank deep into his heart. Do you think it is too late for me? He asked. I am 26. Most writers start much younger. Thomas laughed gently. I did not become famous until I was 35. Did not publish her first book of poetry until she was 40. It is never too late to follow your dreams, James. Never. Wrote poetry. Beautiful poetry, Thomas said, his eyes growing soft with memory. She wrote about love and loss and hope. She wrote about the way moonlight falls on the ocean. She wrote about the sound of rain on a window. Her words were like music. James could see the love in Thomas's eyes when he talked about his wife. It was beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time. She sounds like an amazing woman, James said. She was, Thomas said. She was the best part of me. When she died, I lost that part of myself. But last night, playing that piano, I think I found a little piece of it again. A knock came at the door. Thomas got up and opened it. A hotel staff member stood there with an envelope. This was delivered for you, mister, she said. Thomas thanked her and took the envelope. Inside was a letter on fancy paper. He read it aloud. Dear Mister, my name is David. I am the artistic director of Carnegie Hall. We would be deeply honored if you would consider performing at our venue once again. Please contact me at your earliest convenience to discuss. With admiration and respect, David. Thomas stared at the letter. Carnegie Hall, the most famous concert hall in America. He had played there many times before died. It had always been their favorite place. Carnegie Hall wants you to play, James said in amazement. That is incredible. Thomas sat down heavily on the bed. His hands were shaking. I do not know, he said quietly. I do not know if I am ready for that. What do you mean? Last night was spontaneous, beautiful but spontaneous. A real concert at Carnegie Hall. That is different, that is pressure, that is expectation. What if I fail? What if I disappoint everyone? James moved to sit beside him. Mister, I saw you play last night. You did not fail. You made an entire room of strangers cry with joy. You have a gift that most people can only dream of. But I am old, Thomas said, and tired and scared. James put a hand on his shoulder. Remember what you just told me. Fear of failure is the enemy of dreams. Courage is a choice. Thomas looked at the young man. His words, his own words, echoed back to him. He took a deep breath. You are right, Thomas said. I cannot give advice that I do not follow myself. He looked at the letter again. Carnegie Hall, the place where he had performed some of his greatest concerts, the place where had listened from the front row, tears in her eyes. Maybe it was time to go back. I will think about it, Thomas said finally. I promise. James smiled. That is all I ask. The days passed quickly after that. Thomas stayed in the hotel for a week, trying to decide what to do next. The invitation from Carnegie Hall sat on his desk, waiting for an answer. Every day he picked it up and looked at it. Every day he put it back down. More invitations arrived. Concert halls from around the world wanted him to perform. Television shows wanted to interview him. Book publishers wanted him to write his story. Everyone wanted a piece of Thomas. But Thomas was not ready to make any decisions. He needed time to think, time to breathe, time to figure out who he was now. During this week, Several people came to visit him. Mr. Vincent came to apologize again and to offer Thomas a permanent position as the restaurant's featured pianist. Mrs. Monroe came to share tea and conversation. She had become a true friend. But the visitor who came most often was James. The young waiter stopped by almost every day. Sometimes he brought food from the restaurant. Sometimes he brought books. Sometimes he just came to talk. Thomas enjoyed James's company. The young man reminded him of himself when he was young, eager, curious, full of dreams. They talked about music, literature, life, and everything in between. One afternoon, James arrived with a thick notebook in his hands. His face was nervous but excited. "Mister," he said, "I did something brave, and I wanted to show you." "What is it?" Thomas asked. James handed him the notebook. "These are my stories, the ones I have been writing for years. I never showed them to anyone before, but after our conversations I decided to stop being afraid." Thomas took the notebook gently, like it was something precious. He opened it and began to read. The first story was about a boy who could hear the music in everything, in raindrops, in footsteps, in the wind. The boy was lonely because no one else could hear what he heard. But one day he met a girl who understood. She could hear the music too. Thomas read for a long time, page after page of beautiful words. James had real talent. His writing was simple but powerful. It touched the heart. When Thomas finished reading, he looked up at James with tears in his eyes. "This is wonderful," Thomas said. "Truly wonderful. You have a gift, James." James's face lit up with joy. "Do you really think so?" "I know so," Thomas said. "Your words have music in them that is rare, that is special." James sat down, overwhelmed by the praise. No one had ever told him his writing was good before. He had always been too afraid to show anyone. "What should I do with it?" James asked. "How do I become a real writer?" "You are already a real writer," Thomas said. "You write, so you are a writer. The question is what comes next. And the answer is you keep writing, you keep improving. You send your work to publishers and magazines. Most of them will say no, but some will say yes. And that is all you need. One yes." "It sounds scary," James admitted. "It is scary," Thomas agreed. "Everything worth doing is scary, but you have already taken the first step. You showed your work to someone. That took courage." James smiled. "I learned from you." Thomas laughed softly. "I think we are learning from each other." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while. Then James spoke again. "Mister, have you decided about Carnegie Hall?" Thomas sighed. "Not yet. Every time I think about it, I feel scared. What if I am not as good as I used to be? What if people are disappointed?" "Can I tell you something?" James asked. "Of course." "My grandmother, the one who loves your music, she died 2 days ago." Thomas felt his heart drop. "Oh, James, I am so sorry." James nodded, his eyes wet. "She was old, 93 years old. She had a good life, but I miss her already." "Of course you do," Thomas said gently. "She was your grandmother." "Before she died," James continued, "she told me something. She said that her only regret in life was not doing more of what made her happy. She spent too much time being responsible, being practical, being careful. She wished she had danced more, laughed more, loved more." Thomas listened carefully. "She also said that if she could give me one piece of advice, it would be this: do not wait. Do not wait for the perfect moment. Do not wait until you are ready, because you will never feel ready. Just do it. Jump. Take the risk. Life is too short for waiting." Thomas thought about these words. They echoed something used to say. "Life is a song that only plays once. Make sure you sing it." "Your grandmother was a wise woman," Thomas said. "She was," James agreed. "And I think she would have wanted me to tell you something else." "What?" "She would have wanted to see you play at Carnegie Hall one more time. She never got to see you perform in person. She always said it was her dream, a dream she never fulfilled." Thomas felt tears building in his eyes. How many people out there were like James's grandmother? How many people had dreams of hearing him play? Dreams they might never fulfill if he stayed hidden. James, Thomas said slowly, I think I have been selfish. What do you mean? I have been thinking only about myself. My fear, my pain, my comfort, but music is not just for me. It is a gift meant to be shared. When I hide my gift, I am not just hurting myself. I am hurting everyone who would have been touched by it. James nodded. So what are you going to say to Carnegie Hall? Thomas picked up the letter from his desk. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he smiled. I am going to say yes. James jumped up with excitement. Really? You are going to do it? Yes, Thomas said. It is time to stop running. It is time to stop hiding. It is time to play again. The next day, Thomas called David at Carnegie Hall. They talked for almost an hour. David was thrilled that Thomas had accepted. They decided on a date 2 months away. That would give Thomas time to prepare and practice. After the phone call, Thomas went for a walk in Central Park. The weather was cold but sunny. Snow covered the ground. Children were playing and laughing. Dogs were running and barking. Life was happening all around him. Thomas found a bench and sat down. He watched the people passing by. Young couples holding hands. Old couples walking slowly together. Families with children. Friends sharing secrets. He thought about all the walks they had taken together in this very park. He thought about the way she laughed, the way she smiled, the way she looked at him with love in her eyes. I am going to play again, he whispered, as if she could hear him. I am going to play at Carnegie Hall, just like the old days. I wish you could be there. A gentle breeze blew through the trees. Some snow fell from the branches, sparkling in the sunlight. Thomas smiled. He felt like was answering him. When he returned to the hotel, he found a package waiting for him. It was from Mrs. Monroe. Inside was a beautiful new suit, dark blue with silver buttons. A note was attached. Dear Thomas, the note said, every pianist needs a proper suit for Carnegie Hall. Please accept this gift. It would make me very happy to see you wear it on stage. Your friend, Elizabeth. Thomas held the suit up to the light. It was perfect. He tried it on and looked at himself in the mirror. For the first time in 15 years, he did not see a homeless man. He saw a musician, a pianist, a man with purpose. He smiled at his reflection. Not bad, he said, not bad at all. The 2 months of preparation began. Thomas needed a piano to practice on. Mr. Vincent offered the one at the Golden Melody, but it was not private enough. Too many people would want to watch and listen. Then a solution arrived. A wealthy music lover named Mr. had heard about Thomas's return. He owned a beautiful grand piano in his Manhattan apartment. He offered to let Thomas use it whenever he wanted, completely free. Thomas accepted gratefully. Every day he went to Mr.'s apartment and practiced for hours. His fingers were stiff at first. They had forgotten how to move properly. But slowly, day by day, the muscle memory returned. The old skills came back. He practiced scales and exercises. He practiced difficult passages over and over. He practiced the pieces he would play at Carnegie Hall, Chopin, and one special piece that he had written himself long ago for. It was called Song for. He had never performed it publicly. It was too personal, too painful. But now he felt ready. He wanted the world to hear the music he had written for his wife. He wanted them to know how much he had loved her. As the days passed, Thomas felt himself changing. He stood taller. He smiled more. He talked to strangers without fear. The darkness that had lived inside him for 15 years was slowly fading. Light was coming back. One evening, while practicing at Mr.'s apartment, Thomas felt a presence behind him. He turned around, half expecting to see someone there. But the room was empty. Still, he could not shake the feeling that he was being watched, that someone was listening to his music. He closed his eyes and played a few notes. soft, gentle notes, the opening of song for. And somewhere in his heart, he heard her voice. "Beautiful," she whispered, "just beautiful." Thomas smiled and kept playing. He was ready. The night of the concert arrived. Carnegie Hall was filled with 3,000 people. Every seat was taken. Every balcony was full. People had come from all over the world to see Thomas play again. Some of them had flown from Europe, from Asia, from South America. Some of them had waited in line for days to get tickets. The concert had been sold out within 2 hours of tickets going on sale. It was the fastest sellout in Carnegie Hall's history. Outside the building, crowds of people who could not get tickets stood in the cold, hopping to catch a glimpse of the legendary pianist. News cameras from every major network were there. Reporters spoke into microphones, describing the historic event. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. The audience talked excitedly among themselves. They pointed at the empty stage, at the beautiful grand piano waiting under the spotlight. They whispered about Thomas, about his career, about his disappearance, about his miraculous return. In the front row sat the most important people. Mr. Vincent was there, wearing his finest suit. Mrs. Monroe was there, dressed in an elegant black gown. Mr. Harrison, the businessman from the Golden Melody, was there with his wife. David, the artistic director, was there, nervously checking his watch. And right in the center of the front row sat James. The young waiter was wearing a new suit that Thomas had bought for him. In his pocket was a small notebook and pen. He was planning to write about this night, his first real story as a professional writer. Backstage, Thomas stood alone in his dressing room. He wore the blue suit that Mrs. Monroe had given him. He looked at himself in the mirror. His gray hair was neatly combed. His face was calm but serious. His eyes were bright and focused. On the table beside him was a photograph. It was an old picture taken many years ago. She was sitting at a piano, smiling at the camera. Thomas always carried this photograph with him. It was his most precious possession. "Tonight is for you," Thomas whispered to the photograph. "Everything I play tonight, I play for you." There was a knock on the door. A stage manager poked his head in. "Mister, 5 minutes until showtime." Thomas nodded, "Thank you." He took one last look at his photograph. Then he put it in his pocket, close to his heart. He walked out of the dressing room and made his way toward the stage. The journey from the dressing room to the stage was not long, but it felt like miles. Thomas's heart was beating fast. His hands were shaking slightly. He could hear the murmur of the audience beyond the curtain. 3,000 people waiting for him. He stopped just before the entrance to the stage. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. "I can do this," he told himself. "I have done this 1,000 times before. I was born to do this." The stage manager appeared beside him. "Ready, mister?" Thomas opened his eyes. "Yes, I am ready." The lights in the auditorium dimmed. The audience fell silent. A single spotlight illuminated the grand piano on stage. Then slowly, Thomas walked out. The applause was immediate and overwhelming. 3,000 people rose to their feet. They clapped and cheered and called his name. The sound was deafening. It washed over Thomas like a wave. He walked to the center of the stage and stood beside the piano. He looked out at the audience. He could see their faces, their smiles, their tears. They were so happy to see him, so grateful that he had returned. Thomas bowed deeply. The applause continued for several minutes. He had to motion for them to stop so he could begin. Finally, the hall fell silent. Thomas sat down at the piano. He adjusted the bench. He placed his hands on the keys. 3,000 people held their breath. The first note filled the air. It was Chopin again, the same piece he had played at the Golden Melody that first night, Ballade No. 1 in G minor, but tonight it sounded different, fuller, richer, more beautiful than ever before. Thomas played with everything he had, every emotion, every memory, every ounce of love in his heart. The music poured out of him like water from a spring. It flowed through the hall, touching every person in every seat. People began to cry almost immediately. They could not help it. The music was too beautiful, too powerful. It spoke to something deep inside their souls. In the front row, James was writing furiously in his notebook. He was trying to capture this moment in words, but he knew that words could never do it justice. Some things were beyond language. Mrs. Monroe sat with tears streaming down her face. She thought of her late husband. She thought of all the happy times they had shared. The music made her sad, but it also made her grateful, grateful for the love she had known. Mr. Vincent watched with amazement. He thought about how he had almost turned Thomas away that first night, how he had judged him by his clothes, how wrong he had been. It was a lesson he would never forget. Thomas played piece after piece, his Moonlight Sonata, Claire Lune's Hungarian Rhapsody. Each one was a masterpiece. Each one left the audience speechless. Then came the final piece of the night. Thomas paused before beginning. He looked out at the audience and spoke into the microphone. "This last piece is very special to me," he said. His voice was soft but clear. "I wrote it many years ago for my wife. She was the love of my life. She was my everything. When she died, I thought my life was over. I thought music was over. But tonight I understand that she never really left me. She lives in every note I play. She lives in every song I sing. She lives in my heart forever." He paused, his eyes glistening with tears. "This piece is called Song for. I have never performed it publicly before. Tonight I share it with you." He turned back to the piano and began to play. The music was like nothing the audience had ever heard. It started soft and gentle, like a whisper. It told the story of two young people falling in love, of laughter and joy and hope. The notes danced and sparkled like sunlight on water. Then the music changed. It became sadder, more serious. It told the story of illness, of struggle, of pain. The notes cried out with anguish and fear. Some people in the audience had to look away. It was too emotional to watch. But the music changed again. It became peaceful, accepting. It told the story of love that never ends, of memory that never fades, of hope that never dies. The notes rose up, higher and higher, until they seemed to touch the sky. The final chord hung in the air for a long moment, then silence. Complete, absolute silence. For a second, Thomas was afraid. Had he failed? Had the music not touched them? Then the applause began. It was unlike anything Thomas had ever experienced. The entire audience was on their feet, clapping and cheering and crying. The sound was so loud it shook the walls of Carnegie Hall. People were hugging each other. Strangers were holding hands. Everyone was united by the power of the music they had just heard. Thomas stood up from the piano. Tears were flowing down his face. He did not try to hide them. He bowed to the audience again and again. Flowers rained down from the balconies. Red roses, white lilies, yellow tulips. The stage was soon covered with flowers. Thomas picked up one red rose and held it to his heart. He thought of how much she would have loved this moment. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for giving me the courage to play again." The applause continued for 20 minutes. Thomas took bow after bow. Finally, the house lights came on, signaling the end of the concert. But the audience did not want to leave. They kept clapping, kept cheering. Eventually, Thomas raised his hand for silence. The crowd quieted down. "Thank you," he said into the microphone. "Thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you for remembering me. Thank you for giving me a second chance. I spent 15 years running from my past, running from my pain. But tonight I learned something important." He paused, gathering his thoughts. We cannot run from grief. We cannot hide from sorrow, but we can transform it. We can take our pain and turn it into something beautiful. We can take our tears and turn them into music. That is what taught me. That is what music has taught me. He looked out at the audience, at all the faces watching him with love and admiration. So I make you a promise tonight. I will never stop playing. I will never stop sharing my gift. For as long as I live, I will make music. For all of you. For everyone who has ever lost someone they loved and needed something to help them through. The applause erupted again. This time Thomas let it wash over him. He accepted it, he embraced it, he deserved it. Later that night, after the concert was over, Thomas walked out of Carnegie Hall with James by his side. The crowds were still gathered outside. They cheered when they saw him. Camera flashes lit up the night. Thomas waved to them and smiled. Then he and James walked away together into the quiet streets of New York. "That was incredible," James said. "The best night of my life." "Mine too," Thomas agreed. "In a long time." They walked in silence for a while. The streets were peaceful. Fresh snow was starting to fall. "What happens now?" James asked. Thomas thought about the question. He thought about all the possibilities that lay ahead. More concerts, more music, more life. "I do not know exactly," Thomas said, "but I know one thing for sure." "What is that?" Thomas stopped walking and looked up at the sky. The snow was falling gently, landing on his face like tiny kisses. "I am not afraid anymore," he said. "I am not running anymore. I am home." James smiled. "That sounds like a happy ending." Thomas shook his head. "No, James, it is not an ending at all. It is a beginning." They continued walking through the snowy streets. An old man and a young man, a pianist and a writer, two people whose lives had been changed forever by one cold December night when a stranger asked to play piano in exchange for dinner. And somewhere above them, among the falling snowflakes and the shining stars, a woman named watched and smiled. Her song was finally being heard.